And I'll double check that the everything that's recorded is on that playlist today um, before I wrap up. Okay, so we're going to talk about the documenting tools. The first thing in the documenting tools is the grid tool. Um, it's oftentimes where people start, but it's sort of late game typically. Usually we understand the building before we start laying out a grid. Most of our projects don't have a set grid, but the grid tool is pretty simply, we just have one favorite here. And you have to unlock the layer in order to place it. We don't place grids on every wall. We would basically place, it depends on the project, maybe to the face of the wall. Maybe in this case, maybe it's to the center line of each column. I don't necessarily know that the example file that we use for practice is using what we should be doing as a standard, but I'm just going to drop in some grids here as an example. Um, and then the grids in terms of naming and numbering them, it's just in their settings, Command T to get to the settings, and it's going to be down here under naming rules. And every grid is just a manually named grid. So this would be like A1, or typically it would just be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then A, B, C, D. In this case, because it's a multiple building project, I know that there was like building A had grids AA and A1, AB, and A2. Building B had B1 and B2 and BB. So it was kind of weird and clunky, but that was the grid system that they set up for that project. Normally, it would just be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then A, B, C, D for the grid settings. If you do end up with grids that are kind of close together for some reason, let's say they're like 18 inches apart, you can actually offset them out in plan view. That's not very common. It might be common if we have like a grid on just one side. So you can actually turn the grid off on one side so it's not running all the way through. So maybe you've got grid 1 and 2 on this side and then jumps down to 3 here. But let's go and drop a grid there. Okay. The important thing about those grids is if I rotate an elevation here and open that elevation up. Oh, you know what? I don't have it wide enough. What's going on there? Let's go and pull this open. Uh, Open with source view. There we go. So now we get the grid settings here. We want to make sure that we're not editing those grids in the elevation directly. If I wanted to say that this grid is 20 feet above my project zero here, the problem with that is it doesn't update in all the views. Sometimes it'll get hung up in other views and not be in the consistent spot. So it's better to come into the floor plan, grab all your grids, and adjust the section elevation settings here. Um, Other than that, there's really not much in the grid tool directly that you need to worry about. The elevation and section markers do have a grid setting. This is just a common troubleshooting thing to note. In the elevation and section markers, there's a setting here to show grids and hide certain grids. So if you did have a grid that wasn't running all the way through the building, you could say you want to show grids by name, and then you could select the name. Here I can see that because most of my grids are all the same name, it's only giving me these ones. But it's a weird thing. It's like an inclusive thing. Like you have to select the grids that you want to include in that elevation marker. You don't exclude the ones. So you have to go through and select which grids you want to show. Typically, it would be all. Now the auto stagger setting right here is actually important because if you did have two grids that were really close together, again, this doesn't happen very often. Offsetting them in plan is simple. However, in elevation, it'll offset one direction on, say, the south elevation, but it offsets the same direction. So it's not like it offsets to the east, it offsets to the left, which means that on the opposite elevation, it would be offsetting and overlapping that grid. So to prevent that, we have this auto stagger setting under the marker, the elevation marker settings. Oops. For auto stagger. What that means though is that we don't have control over how far apart these are. They're just automatically set to be whatever that default spacing is for the grid tool. Um, Now the grids are a fixed scale. So if, for example, we looked at this plan at, let's say, 1/8 inch scale, the grids appear to be larger. because it's like a font size, right? 7-point font is 7-point font, no matter what scale your drawing is. So if you have a 16th inch drawing, 7-point font appears really large, even though it's the same exact size on the sheet. The grids are the same way, and the markers are the same way. So it's an important thing to note that as your drawing scale gets smaller, you might want to turn things like your grids and your elevation, your section markers off, because they do occupy more of the drawing volume by scale. Okay, let's see here. The dimension tool, let's talk about that next. So with regards to dimensions, we have three dimension tick types for our standards. If we're dimensioning to a center line of an element, it's an open circle tick mark. If we're dimensioning to the face of concrete or face of stud or framing, it's a slash. And if we're dimensioning to face of finish, it's an open arrow. So if we go to our dimension tool over here in the toolbox, you'll notice under geometry methods, there's this standard dimension, linear dimension, and then there's the cumulative dimension. Let's just say, for example, I wanted to dimension from center line of this column to face of stud. Um, if I go to that dimension tool and I change my dimension tick marker to be an open circle, I can click here to here and get that dimension tool. However, I cannot select this dimension type and edit just that one tick mark. So if I'm going from face of, or center line rather, to face of stud, what I need to do is use this cumulative dimension. Now, and then after that, I can say that this is an open tick mark. The way that this cumulative dimension works is the only people I've seen actually dimension plans this way are design build firms. And that's because they want to just go out there and stretch a tape and start laying down chalk lines. They're not trying to think about what the design is or the design intent. They just want to lay down chalk lines on a subfloor. And so this is 2 3/4 from the origin point to the first point, 3'2" from the first point to the second, 6'6" from the first point to the third, etc. So you're instead of saying that this is this segment, you're saying this is the total length from the circle to that point. We're not going to use that method, so we're going to clear these dimensions out and say that that's that dimension string. Now, if I want to go from center line to center line, I have to have a totally separate dimension string to go from here to here. Um, And to place a dimension, you're just going to basically click on the point that you're going to dimension to. Click on the point that you're going to dimension to. You can add as many points as you need. And then you're going to double click. You do get the option, if I know I want to be perpendicular or parallel to a vector, I can hover over it. You get the sort of little Mercedes parallel symbol. That's going to lock it to that axis. And then I can go add that as a dimension string here. But this dimension string and this dimension string cannot be joined, or it's going to unify them into, just show you what happens there. It's going to unify it into all being that sort of aggregate dimension type. This dimension and this dimension string, they're different dimensions, but I can unify those. To merge those two dimensions together, I select one and I hold Command and click on the other. Now, instead of two separate dimensions, I have a single dimension string. To add additional nodes to this dimension string, I can hold down the Command key and click on the next point I want to dimension to. If I want to adjust what a dimension is strung to, I can click on that dimension node, and then the pet palette allows me to move what that's snapping to, so I can snap to that point instead. And these dimensions, when they're selected as associated to an element, they will move and relocate and reposition to those. If you've ever used Revit, you know that in Revit, you could type what dimension you want that to be, and it'll move the element that it's associated to. ArchiCAD does not have that feature. So they do link to the dimension, they do link to the element. So if I move this element, the dimension changes, but it doesn't work the other way around. I cannot type in a dimension here and have the model geometry change. Again, to add additional segments, I can select a segment and I can command click on what I want to dimension to. If I want to eliminate a segment, say I want to get rid of this space right here, I can just select the text and delete it, and it'll eliminate that. You can also select a dimension node and delete it and delete individual dimension nodes. Okay. There are also angle and radial dimensions here. It's the same thing. If I wanted an angle dimension, I just select the angle dimension tool. I select the vector that I want to dimension to first, and the relationship I'm going to have to it, let's say right here, and then place the dimension. Um, I do not have a favorite for these dimensions, unfortunately, so you'll have to basically fuss around with the settings a little bit. It's something that I'm long past due needing to do. But these 184 pens are going to be your text dimensions. Again, face of finish. That should about do it. So that's the angular dimension. The radial dimension is the same thing. It's just if you had like a circle or something with a radius, whether it's a wall or an actual drafted circle, the angular dimension is just a matter of clicking and placing that angle dimension for the radius. All of these dimension texts, whether it's the radial dimension, the degrees, you can select that text and add custom text. Obviously, we don't want to override this text. I don't want to have this like 16 feet in my plan because it's not 16 feet. I want to actually have the measured value. You could say plus or minus. You can add the plus or minus symbol, or you could say like 3 equal in that text. But because it's using that measured value, if the thing that it's dimensioned to moves, it adjusts that dimension still. And there may be times when you want to use a dimension but not have the dimension shown at all. So, like interior casework and cabinets, for example, where we're just conveying the design intent, you could override the whole text. That's a lot less problematic than changing the dimension of that text. The other thing about the dimension is our dimension styles. If we look under the view settings here, our dimension styles are dimensioning to the nearest 64th of an inch. And that's intentional. That is there so that if our model is off at all, we correct the model and it raises red flags so that we don't end up with cases where the total dimension string says 44 9 and a quarter, but maybe this says 16 foot 3 and 3/8. It doesn't add up to what the total dimension is because of rounding errors. So dimensioning to the nearest 64th avoids those rounding errors. And 64ths do show up as a big red flag on needing to fix the model. Okay, and with that in mind, if I were to take this model and let's just pull this over, I don't know, 128th of an inch, it's still going to show as equal dimensions. However, the next thing that I want to talk about is the label tool. And most of the label tool is pretty straightforward, but there's this really cool label. In the topic of self-audits that we had earlier this week, there's this ortho check label. So if I were to attach an ortho check label to this wall, it shows that that wall is out of ortho. It's 90.0012 degrees. So there's a way that you can, for example, grab all of your walls and go to Document, label selected elements, and you can attach that ortho check label to all of the walls in the project just to verify that everything is orthogonal. So down here under this model portion that you were working on, it looks like everything's orthogonal. It's perfect. And then it's just a temporary thing, like a red flag for checking whether things are out of ortho or not.
Is
Oh,
there like a quick fix if it's not, or do you have to like go through each wall individually and
you kind of
adjust
have to
it?
go through each wall individually. You can
Hmm.
use like things like the marquee. I can pull this over and snap it to here. And once it is orthogonal again, I can see that it says okay.
Hmm.
Sometimes if it's off by just a little bit, what I'll do is like I'll move it way off so it's not almost ortho, and then I'll use the rotate command to rotate it back into ortho.
Hmm.
There's little things like that that you can do. Generally speaking, as long as you're holding shift and direct inputting into the tracker, shift and R, you should see that things are basically maintained orthogonally pretty effectively. Additional label types, we primarily are using them as for like annotating details and stuff. We're going to use this text auto text label. We also use this for keynotes and stuff like that. So if you have a keynote, you might just have like 01 as your keynote type. And then our graphic standards for the keynotes are to include the text frame. And then that actually ties to the notes and legends worksheet here. So like if I have, yeah, here, there's my plan notes and my keynotes. So if I have keynotes on, let's just say the floor plan, I would put those in here. So I would be like, I would update keynote one here. And these are just text and labels. So you can copy these down as many times as you need to and add more information. But we don't have default boilerplate keynotes in ArchiCAD. It's all project by project. Um, for basic detail annotation, we're not going to use that. So like under the details that we were looking at before, let's go to this one, for example. That's as simple as just, oops, the placement method we can actually use as like a 3-click method. So I can give that curve. And it's literally just clicking to place these labels. So I would say like this is my Z flashing, this is my conk, whatever it is. Anyway, so annotating those details is really simple. They are associated, so if the element that they're clicked to moves, they do move with it. The problem with that is like if I wanted to say have the same label up here, or maybe even have it over on another detail, if this part of that detail gets deleted, all of those associated labels get deleted as well. Um,
If
so
you copy it, oh, sorry. If you copy it over, can you like reselect a different host?
Yep, that's what I was just going to mention. So
Oh,
on this
okay.
one, I want it to associate to this one. So I'll select that dimension and surprise, surprise, command click is the key for that. Command
Hmm.
click is really kind of a catch-all for a lot of things in ArchiCAD. And now that thing is associated to this one. If you wanted to just grab all of your details and disassociate them, you can grab your detail tool, or sorry, your label tool, and hit Command A and cut them out and paste them back in, and now they're no longer associated to anything. So if this thing moves, gets deleted, these are disassociated labels. There's nothing in the settings of the label that says these are associated or not. So that's really the only way to disassociate the labels from an element. It could be that you don't want to place an associated label to begin with. You can do that right here. It doesn't have to be, it can be an independent label to begin with. Um, but I don't think that you can select, yeah, you can't select an associated label and make it disassociated, unfortunately. So the cut and paste is sort of the workaround for that. I have seen that before where like somebody just grabbed details or labels rather, and they started moving those labels around all over the place, and they were associated labels, and an element got deleted, and they lost all of their annotation. It sucks. It's unfortunate. Just something to be aware of is these labels are associative by default. Okay. The next tool that I want to talk about. Oh, the other label to talk about are the wall tag labels. So under the favorites here, there's this wall tag. I can click on that one. And the wall tag, it's a funky, awkward label type to manipulate. These pink hotspots are where we edit that. But it basically it's pulling the element ID of that wall. Looks like it didn't associate to the wall. There we go. So if this wall is wall type 01, then I rename the wall and then that label updates. If I were to copy this over, associate it to this wall, you can see that it automatically tries to associate. You can move it here. I don't think you can actually rotate it. Yeah. So rotating it becomes really weird and awkward. I think that somewhere in here there's like a flip or invert the labels somewhere. It's one of these. There we go. So you can actually have it all readable, legible like this as well. But it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit clunky. Generally, what I do is I'll get two of them going the right direction, so one horizontal, one vertical, and then I'll just drag copies of them around, and then as go back through and command click them to the walls that they need to be associated to. So it's not a perfect system, but the reason that I like it is graphically it looks right, and then we can also do a find and select. That's Command F, and I can eyedrop this wall and say I'm looking for all walls that use this composite name. And I can grab all of the walls in the project using that composite name and name them W01. Go to the next composite type, eyedrop those into the find and select, and name them 02. So you can actually be pretty systematic and effective at renumbering and identifying the walls once you have the labels all attached. Or really even before you have the labels attached. I guess it doesn't have to be in that order. Um, the next tool to talk about is the zone tool. So the zone tool is basically, first and foremost, it's the room stamp. It's the room name. So if I grab a zone here, right here, we'll go to our favorites. Where'd my zone favorites go? Oh, that's just downright weird. We've had a collaborative effort on the template lately, and I think things are getting mixed up. Anyway, the construction method on the zone is polygon, rectangular, or associated. Now, because we have, obviously, we're not dealing with like office plans and stuff. We have a lot of great rooms and open spaces with no zone boundaries. We're not going to try and create zone boundaries where they don't exist. So, and I prefer to see all using the same method. So, generally speaking, I want to see the rectangular method as a placement. So I can just place a zone here and drop that in. Oh, this should be using the zone label. So the reason that we like that zone label is because for the RCP view, I don't want to see the zone tag because oftentimes that, oh, here's the label actually. That is the label associated to this zone. So if the zone changes, let's call it great room. That label changes. Uh, and generally on the floor plan, for example, we want to see the zone tag shown here. This zone label is a separate thing that's associated to that zone. So this would be on our RCP annotation layer so that we could hide that on the floor plans. And the reason for that is that usually on our floor plans, the room name goes to the center of the room. On RCPs, there's usually a light fixture in the center of most rooms. So being able to shift that zone name from one plan to the other is a super useful trick for being able to annotate and put light fixtures where you need them. This can literally go anywhere. And that's the case for really any other plan type as well. If we had a furniture plan or a large plan or something like that, and we wanted this room name to be over here, we can drag that label over here, put it on the annotation layer for that plan type, and then that room name will show up in that position for that plan type. So using labels in association with the zones is a great way to be able to be flexible on where that zone tag shows up. Other things about the zones, it's going to help with our door and window schedules. So if we go to the door schedule, for example, I can see here that that door is showing up in the great room because that zone is abutting the face of finish of the wall that's hosting that door. So there's a few things with regards to troubleshooting this. If the zone is pulled away from the wall, it will not associate to that door to that zone. If the zone runs through the wall, it sometimes will not associate. So the ideal is to place that zone to the face of finish of that wall. The zones are also really useful, can be really useful for interior elevations. If I grab an interior elevation marker here, let's go ahead and pull our favorites. And I'm just going to place an interior elevation marker in this room from the back corner to this corner. And then I'm going to offset it in. There's my interior elevations. If I look here, the interior elevations are automatically pulling their orientation from the project location. And then they're also giving me their association to that zone name. So if we look in the view map now, um, let's actually look in the project map maybe. There we go. So it's calling out North Great Room, East Great Room, South Great Room, West Great Room. It's masking a bunch of stuff out, and that's because the the zone is showing. So the zone will actually mask things out. So you want to make sure that the zone is hidden in your interior elevation view. For the most part, we don't utilize the zone number in our zone stamp or in our zone stamps. If you did need the room number, you can add that to the label or to the zone itself. It's just a matter of adding that right here, and it'll dump it in as a line below. I want to say there's only maybe two or three projects that have required zone numbers. Our graphic standards actually call for us to not use zone numbers, but because it's a standard, we're going to find places that we need to break it. So I know that the Marine Way project has room numbers because it's such a big project. We also have some projects where the interior designer or the jurisdiction has even requested zone numbers to be part of our plan set. So there are times when we have to place the zone numbers. It's just part of the zone settings right here, zone name and zone number. So I'm just trying to make sure there's so little to go over. I just don't want to skim over anything here that we're talking about. All right, so next, discussing basic text settings. So for the text tool itself, um, you can select the text tool and you can just drag and swipe and you get this actual paragraph kind of font or editor. The important thing here is if you have tabs like this, indents, um, some PDF readers don't recognize those indents. So in order to get around that, you have to actually set your indents here in the menu bar. Right? And that for whatever reason, those little preset indent tabs will follow through to a PDF reader. For some reason, this one occasionally won't. I think that Bluebeam has struggled with that in the past. Um, so the indents are important in the text settings. There's this always readable setting. That's another thing that we can view it correctly in ArchiCAD as always readable, right? So if it's not always readable, it could be upside down. Um, if I set it to always readable, it'll swing around 180 degrees. Sometimes, because the PDF reader won't recognize that 180 degrees rotation, it'll actually show correctly in ArchiCAD as always readable, but it'll show this way in a PDF. So generally speaking, I want the always readable to be off. I want the rotation to be at 0. We also have the typical text functions here, formatting size. There's the anchor point. So if, for example, I put the anchor point here and it's aligned to the left, that means when I go to add additional text, it's going to stay anchored to that position, just like with the reference line and things, the reference line for beams and walls or reference point for columns. If it's at the center point here and it becomes, let's just add an extra long line of text here, it'll stay centered to the text box. Right, so it's not going to shift one way or the other because it becomes longer. There's also options to undo the text wrap. That basically switches it from that sort of drag and place text into, if you just double click, you have single line text that you can add in there just double clicking. So if I go to place a text, just double click and you can start typing. There are also text symbols. And there's auto text options. So the text symbols here, this little omega symbol, it for whatever reason starts with emojis. I hope to never see a plan set with emojis in it. But there are copyrights and trademark symbols. There are math symbols in here. Um, It's like a typical symbol library. There's also auto text. The auto text can pull from any piece of information in ArchiCAD. We can also do that with the label. The label's auto text is a little bit more versatile. So if I were to place a text label to this crown molding, and let's just dump in auto text here. So let's say elevation to project 0. Um, maybe profile name. So you can actually pull information from the elements that that label is associated to. Auto text, I don't know that that's something that we're going to need a lot of, but it's there. We are able to draw information from the model, whether it's geometry, whether it's properties, whether it's anything to do with what that element is or the information attached to that element can be applied to a label. Because text is not applied to an element, um, I could say I want to say building material or something like that in here, but there's nothing that it pulls from. Generally speaking, the text tool, where it shines in terms of its auto text information, is here on either the cover sheet or on like the title block, for example, is pulling the project name right here. Um, and this gets into the information management section, so we can go ahead and sort of incorporate these together. But like things like the site address, project name, APN, TMK, whatever project information, all of that is stored under File, Info, and Project Info. And this is stuff in any project, anything with an asterisk, you're going to want to fill this out as you know it, basically. So if we don't know exactly how many stories are in the house to begin with, that might stay blank. But maybe we know who the structural engineer is right out of the gate. So come in here and fill that information out when we know it. And then that stuff all populates. If we go to our cover sheet or title sheet rather, populates on these notes and legends here. So here's all the contact information that gets filled out when we know it. The project info there. There's also location settings here that get filled out from the project info, and that's all using auto text. All right, the line, circle, polyline, and spline tools. I mean, these are just drafting tools. They have arrow options for dashed lines on the polyline. They have options for how they interact with the corners. So the cool thing about that is that if we draw a line, it's never going to leave a blank at that corner unless it's using this other type, and then it's just going to carry the length of that around. But generally speaking, that dashed line type is what we want to use. The most important thing here that I want to point out is this uniform settings for line tools. If you're doing a lot of detailed drafting, it could be that you find you switch from the polyline to the line tool a lot. And maybe your polyline needs to be a solid line. Um, if we uncheck this, I can draft polylines that are solid lines. And then maybe I want to go to my arc tool and that needs to be a dashed line. Um, and my spline tool needs to be circles, right? So each of these can have their own different line types. If I were to make them a uniform type, now going to my polyline is going to use that same line type. They're going to basically, didn't I turn that on? Is it glitching out on me? Yeah, there we go. For some reason it was glitching out. So now they're all solid line. So that's generally where they're set to. But if you did ever find yourself needing to switch back and forth between the tools and you needed different line types for each tool, you do have that option. Generally, if I'm going to a spline, I've already got splines placed. I'm just going to eyedrop that spline and start drawing. Same with the line tool. So if I drop this line tool, it makes that double dash line my new line type. And then the fill tool, it's even simpler. We talked about fills as attributes earlier. We do have the fill categories, but generally speaking, if I'm drafting fills, I'm going to use the drafting fill here. So real simple, it's just the pattern, whatever pattern you have with the foreground pen and the background pen. Okay. And then I think we talked about this before, but there is also this detailing graphic favorites. This includes a whole lot of different fill types for drawing details. So this would be the best resource rather than trying to like fish around and find what fills, line types, pens, etc. to use. If you're drawing details, most of the stuff that you're going to need to assemble a detail is going to be on this detail viewpoint. All right. Now the next session is on, we already talked about the project info under file info, project info. But really the hub of information management in ArchiCAD is going to be under options and property manager. The properties are really at the core of the information that we're attaching in ArchiCAD. And they're associated to classifications. So classifications are what define what that element is, regardless of what the tool is. I think I mentioned this before, but like this is a wall, if and only if down here it's classified as a wall. But because it has that classification as a wall, I have access to attach all of this information to it, environmental information, schedule information. Yeah, Kelly.
Sorry, I was trying to get to my ArchiCAD. Sorry, I didn't mean that.
Oh, okay.
I'll lower my hand. Apologies.
No problem. Um, so the classification is the definition of what that element is, but it's also the filter for which properties are going to show in that tool. So, for example, the zone that I have right here should be classified as a space, and because it's classified as a space, I have access to all of this finished schedule information. So if, for example, I want to start doing a finish schedule, I'm going to start by going into my property manager and I'm going to go through, sorry, it's going to take a second to reserve. Um, but I'm going to go through and set the default in the property manager for what all of my various finishes are. The finish schedule is literally just a list of the zones in the project and then what finishes we've attached to them. Not in terms of like physical appearance or surfaces or attributes. It's literally just information attached to the zones. So, and the reason for that is because we're not usually calling out like specific materials or finishes. It's like finish code. So like STO1, Stone 1, WBO1, Wire Brush 1, whatever. And that's all in the notes and legends section. So we're coordinating the notes and legends to our property list, and that all shows up on a finished schedule. For the most part, we're only really doing door, window, and finished schedules in ArchiCAD. So those are just lists of zones for the finished schedule, doors for the door schedule, windows for the window schedule. Um, so in here, I can go through and say, well, most of my floor materials are, let's see, ST01, right? So now I've changed that. And because it's changed in the property manager, all of my zones that are using the default are now going to say ST01. Maybe this room in particular I know is not supposed to be stone, so I'm going to change this to WD01. So I make the most common default finish code in the property manager, and then I change the ones that are different from that most common code. And you'll notice here that that little broken link symbol indicates that this no longer matches the default. I can switch it back to the default, and it's going to change back to that STO1. So you're changing the global controls for properties information under the property manager and then adjusting the ones that are different. Additionally, you do have the option in the finish schedule, we come in here, to select each column here individually and adjust the fields in that schedule. As long as the zone is showing and it's reserved, you can actually edit directly in the schedule. I find that that's kind of the most tedious way, but you do get a whole list of what those zones are. And I think, like I said, it was mostly really brief. Oh, there's a couple of other things, I guess. The last thing in terms of information management, if we go to options and project preferences, there's a project location setting here. So this is really useful for understanding like sun position, sun shadows, doing sun studies in ArchiCAD. But it also ties to a lot of the global information when we coordinate with IFC. So setting the project north relative to your site and your building is important for understanding sun position, but also longitude, latitude, time zone, and altitude also all need to be adjusted. The project address is actually pulling from the project info, so this will update when you update the project info. But getting all of this stuff set means that when I come into my model and we give it a 3D style here that has shadows, and I go to my perspective settings, that's Command Option F3 to get to perspective settings. If I set it to a specific date and time, let's just say we're June 21st, 12 p.m. Now I can understand what the sun's going to be doing at noon during the summer equinox. I can also check it at the winter equinox. So this is where we can get like immediate feedback for what our building's doing, what the sun is doing on our building, provided that the project location settings are set correctly. To get to this perspective settings and set a date and a time, it's under View, 3D View Options, and Projection Settings. And here we also have options to uh, increase or decrease the sun settings, sun colors, and hues. So that's less effective or less critical in terms of understanding the sun. We also have options in twin motion. So if you were actually doing a sun study for a client, we would be doing that in twin motion. But because you're not actually designing or adjusting the building in twin motion, it's not necessarily the most helpful. You don't get that immediate feedback. If, for example, I knew that I needed to block this sun at the winter solstice, you can physically rotate the building and see an immediate effect of what that sun's doing with that building rotation live in ArchiCAD, provided that that project location setting is set correctly. Okay. Any questions?
I didn't know those videos were on GovHub, so that'll be helpful as well. So I'll check those out too.
Yeah, and they're broken out into shorter segments where if you're looking at setting up views like we talked about setting up the details and linked markers and stuff, they're all between 6 and 10-minute videos, so it's a lot easier to digest sort of little bits at a time. Rather than going it's good to have these full length ones available that you can scrub through. It should have mostly the same content, but because I'm only going off of a bullet point syllabus here, um, it's sort of a new thing every time, but yeah, it's just one more resource to have. So I think for tomorrow, the first session tomorrow, we're going to jump into the site model. So we're going to talk about the mesh tool. We're going to talk about creating custom objects. There's going to be a lot of sort of detailed I call them the unintuitive tools, the mesh, the morph, and the shell. I'd like to go over the stair and the railing tool very briefly, even though they really are kind of awful. But it's good to know what the tools can do and can't do, and mostly know when to give up on them. The thing about the stair and the railing tools, I've seen people spend days and days and days trying to get a stair to work. And they could have modeled it with roofs and slabs and morphs and whatever else in a matter of minutes. So don't get hung up on getting the stair to work with the stair tool, right? It's like this is a slab because I've called it a slab, not because I use the slab tool. In fact, this is not even a slab tool, it's a roof tool. So the classification is what defines that as a slab. Same with the stairs. If I have stair treads and I model those with slabs, they're stair treads because I've classified them as a stair, not because I use the stair tool. And that's not to say that the stairs and the railings don't have their use. It's just that they end up being really fussy and not getting us exactly what we want. So knowing when to use those and when to avoid them. So that'll be the first session, and then after that, we're going to talk about document coordination, placing the building into a site, getting into more detail on that stuff, and then we'll wrap up on Friday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Please reach out if there's any other questions. I'm probably out here for the rest of the afternoon, but I will be checking my messages. So if you have anything, I can always run back down to the computer. We can jump on a call. Otherwise, we'll check in tomorrow.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.